What if I told you that right now, at this very moment, Europe is experiencing not one, not two, but 5 simultaneous crises that nobody seems to be connecting? We're talking about a political earthquake involving brothels in Paris, airspace under siege from balloons, a first lady caught in a profanity scandal, a populist comeback that has Brussels terrified, and an American president openly mocking European weakness. And trust me, what ties all these together is far more disturbing than any single story. Stick around, because what I'm about to reveal at the end will make you question everything you thought you knew about where Europe is heading. I spent years inside one of those big-name media outlets, the kind everyone recognizes, and I watched firsthand how they take stories like these and twist them to fit whatever narrative kept their corporate sponsors happy. I saw editors spike inconvenient truths and reporters self-censor to protect access. That's why I walked away. Now I work for you, I answer to nobody but the facts, and I'm going to show you what's really happening beneath the surface of these headlines. Before we dive in, do me a favor. If you value this kind of independent reporting, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. And listen, I'm going to be completely honest with you. We pour hours into fact-checking every claim, cross-referencing multiple sources, verifying details that other outlets just copy and paste from press releases. That's hard work, and it's work that matters because in a world drowning in fake news and propaganda, someone needs to do the digging. If that resonates with you, if you believe in journalism that serves truth instead of power, consider becoming a channel sponsor. Your support doesn't just keep the lights on, it keeps us free. And I promise you, you're going to want to watch this all the way through because the most explosive revelation is coming at the very end. Let's start in France, where a far-right member of parliament is about to reignite a debate the country thought it had settled nearly 8 decades ago. Jean-Philippe Tanguy, a deputy from Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party, is preparing legislation that would reopen brothels across France. Now, before you dismiss this as just some fringe politician's provocation, understand what he's actually proposing. Back in April 1946, the French Parliament voted to shut down all legal brothels, roughly 1,400 establishments nationwide, including 195 in Paris alone. These weren't just any establishments. We're talking about famous high-end venues like Le Chabanais, Le Sphinx, and 122, places where European elite would gather. But we're also talking about the so-called maison d'abattage, which translates roughly to slaughterhouses, cheap facilities where women worked completely exposed, servicing hundreds of clients every single day. Tanguy's proposal would create cooperatives run by the workers themselves, and he's got Marine Le Pen's backing. Prostitutes will be empresses in their own kingdom, the deputy declared, arguing that France's 2016 law criminalizing clients only made things worse for those in the trade. And here's what makes this interesting. Belgium just showed it could work. Since 2024, workers there can sign actual employment contracts, getting healthcare, pensions, all the protections any other worker receives. But why now? Why is the far right pushing this? That's the question nobody in mainstream media wants to ask, because the answer might reveal something uncomfortable about how populist movements are reshaping Europe's moral framework. And that's just the beginning. While France debates bedrooms, Lithuania is facing something that sounds like it came straight out of a spy thriller. Hundreds of balloons, launched from Belarus, carrying thousands of packs of contraband cigarettes, are literally shutting down the country's airspace. I'm not exaggerating. The National Crisis Management Center recorded about 600 violations of Lithuanian airspace by balloons this year, plus 197 drone incursions. But here's where it gets serious. Authorities declared a state of emergency after 25 weather balloons carrying contraband crossed the border, with 2 hovering directly over Vilnius airport. Think about that. The capital's main airport had to close multiple times in October and November, cancelling over 320 flights and disrupting more than 45,000 passengers. Border guards retrieved at least 11 balloons containing 18,000 packs of smuggled cigarettes, though that number is probably going to climb. Now, Lithuanian officials are calling these hybrid attacks, and Crisis Center representative Vilma Ruginienė said last week they could also be classified as acts of extremism. But here's what should really worry you. Lithuanian authorities are pointing fingers at Belarusian smugglers. Sure, but they're saying something more significant, that Minsk is deliberately allowing this to continue. This isn't just about cigarettes. This is about testing European defenses, about showing how vulnerable NATO's eastern flank really is. And if you think balloons are harmless, remember that these incursions are creating exactly the kind of chaos and uncertainty that benefits certain actors who want to see European unity crack. We'll come back to who benefits from this chaos, but first, we need to talk about what happened in a Paris theatre that has the French political establishment in absolute meltdown. Brigitte Macron, France's First Lady, was caught on video using language that would make a sailor blush, and the target of her profanity, feminists. The footage, shot backstage at the Folies Bergère Theatre in Paris, shows the president's wife talking with comedian Ari Abitan, who's previously faced allegations of misconduct. When he told her he was scared because feminists had disrupted his show the night before, shouting Abitan is a predator, Brigitte Macron called them salescon, which roughly translates to stupid bitches, and added, "We'll throw them out." Now her office tried damage control, claiming she was just trying to calm the performers' nerves, and was criticizing the radical method of protest, not feminists themselves. But that explanation isn't landing. The feminist organization Nu Tut, which organized Saturday's protest, turned the insult into a social media hashtag, and an activist using the name Gwen said the collective was deeply shocked and scandalized by Macron's language. "This is yet another insult to victims and feminist groups," she said. Opposition figures from the left are demanding an apology, and even former President François Hollande told RTL Radio, "The problem here is vulgarity." But wait, here's the twist that tells you everything about French politics right now. Jean-Philippe Tanguy, yes, the same far-right deputy pushing to legalize brothels, jumped to Brigitte Macron's defense, saying her comments were private and stolen. Let that sink in. The far right defending the progressive president's wife while the left attacks her. If that doesn't tell you French politics has entered some kind of bizarre mirror universe, I don't know what would. Are you starting to see the pattern yet? Because we're only halfway through, and the connections are about to get much clearer. Make sure you're subscribed because we're about to show you how all of this ties together. Now let's shift east to the Czech Republic, where a familiar face just made a comeback that has Brussels extremely nervous. Andrej Babiš, the billionaire populist who styles himself as the Czech Trump, just returned as prime minister nearly 4 years after leaving office. President Petr Pavel swore in the 71-year-old at Prague Castle, making him the oldest politician ever to lead a Czech or former Czechoslovak government. Babiš's ANO party, which won October's parliamentary elections, formed a coalition with two deeply eurosceptic parties, the far-right SPD and the Motorists Party. Together they control 108 of 200 seats in the Chamber of Deputies, and their political declaration makes their position crystal clear. "The European Union has its limits," they wrote, "and doesn't have the authority to impose decisions that violate member state sovereignty." During his campaign, Babiš, who's an ardent supporter of Donald Trump, promised to slash support for Ukraine, a sharp contrast from the outgoing center-right administration that provided significant humanitarian and military aid to Kyiv. Both ANO and the Motorists belong to the European political group Patriots for Europe, which Babiš co-founded with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. And if you're wondering why this matters, consider this. You now have a corridor of eurosceptic, Russia-friendly governments running from Budapest through Bratislava to Prague, Robert Fico in Slovakia, Viktor Orbán in Hungary, and now Babiš back in the Czech Republic. These aren't isolated incidents. This is a coordinated shift, and it's happening while Europe faces its greatest security challenges in generations. But if you think Brussels is concerned about Babiš, wait until you hear what America's president just said about European leaders. This is where everything comes together. Donald Trump just delivered what might be the most devastating assessment of European leadership in modern history. In an exclusive interview with Politico, the American president didn't hold back. "I think they're weak," he said about European political leaders. "But I also think they want to be so politically correct. I think they don't know what to do. Europe doesn't know what to do." He criticized traditional U.S. allies for failing to control migration and for their inability to end the war in Ukraine, making it clear he's willing to support European political candidates who share his vision for the continent. And here's the kicker. Trump said Russia is clearly in a stronger position than Ukraine, offering absolutely zero reassurance to European allies worried he might abandon them. Politico named Trump the most influential figure shaping European politics in the coming year, recognizing the scale of his impact on the continent. And think about the timing of these remarks. They came right as Europe is experiencing the return of populist leaders like Babiš, social scandals involving heads of state, and unprecedented national security challenges on eastern borders. This isn't coincidence. This is a coordinated unraveling of the post-war European order, and Trump isn't just observing it, he's actively cheering it on. When the President of the United States openly calls your leaders weak and your continent decaying, that's not diplomatic friction, that's a fundamental rupture in in the transatlantic relationship that's existed for decades. So let's connect the dots, because this is where it gets really interesting. What do brothels in Paris, balloons over Lithuania, a first lady's profanity, a populist comeback in Prague, and American contempt for European leadership all have in common? They're all symptoms of the same disease, the collapse of the post-war European consensus. Tanguy's proposal to reopen brothels isn't just about changing prostitution laws, it's about the far right rewriting the social contract that's existed since 1946. The balloons over Lithuania aren't just smuggling operations, they're demonstrations of European vulnerability to new forms of hybrid warfare. Brigitte Macron's insult isn't just a personal scandal, it's evidence of the growing chasm between political elites and activist movements. Babiš's return isn't just one election result, it's the strengthening of a eurosceptic, Russia-aligned bloc within the EU itself. And Trump's words aren't just criticism, they're permission for these populist movements to accelerate their assault on European unity. Here's what nobody in Brussels wants to admit. Every single one of these crises is both a cause and an effect. The far right rises because traditional parties can't address immigration and economic anxiety, which creates the conditions for more far-right victories. European borders prove vulnerable to unconventional threats, which fuels the narrative that Brussels can't protect its citizens, which drives voters toward nationalists promising strength. Political elites grow detached from social movements, which creates scandals that further erode trust in institutions, which makes populist alternatives more attractive. And through it all, Trump and other external actors see opportunity in European weakness, which they exploit to further fragment an already fracturing alliance. It's a feedback loop, and it's accelerating. Belgium, showing that legalized prostitution can work with proper regulations, might seem progressive, but in the hands of Marine Le Pen's National Rally, it becomes a wedge issue to demonstrate that the far right can be more pragmatic than traditional conservatives. Lithuania's airport chaos might look like a border security failure, but it's actually revealing something more troubling, that European air defense systems weren't designed for threats that cost less than $1 per balloon to deploy. Brigitte Macron defending a performer accused of misconduct while insulting feminists might appear to be just poor judgment, but it actually exposes how France's political elite, regardless of their stated progressive values, will instinctively protect their social class over supporting activist causes. These aren't separate stories. They're chapters in the same book, and the title of that book is The Unraveling of Europe. And here's the part that should really keep you up at night. The National Crisis Management Center in Lithuania can track 600 balloon violations and 197 drone incursions, but what they can't track is how many more are being prepared or where the next unconventional attack vector will come from. French politicians can debate whether brothels should be legal, but what they can't debate away is the fact that a significant portion of their electorate just voted for parties that want to fundamentally reshape France's relationship with the European Union. Brigitte Macron's team can insist her comments were taken out of context, but what they can't erase is the video evidence of exactly how France's First Lady really talks about feminist activists when she thinks cameras aren't rolling. And European leaders can dismiss Trump's characterization of them as weak, but what they can't dismiss is that he's absolutely correct about their inability to present a unified response to any of these crises. Babiš, standing in Prague Castle, taking his oath as Prime Minister for the second time, represents something larger than Czech domestic politics. He's part of what he himself helped create, that Patriots for Europe group that now includes Orbán, Fico, and a growing roster of nationalist leaders who see the European Union not as a solution to continental challenges, but as the primary obstacle to national sovereignty. And when Trump says Europe doesn't know what to do, he's not entirely wrong. Because what is the Brussels response to all of this? Strongly worded statements, concerns about democratic backsliding, threats to withhold funding. None of that has stopped the populist wave. None of that has secured the eastern border. None of that has prevented the normalization of far-right policies that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Think about this trajectory. In 1946, France closed its brothels as part of a broader post-war moral reckoning. In 2024, the far right wants them back, not as a repudiation of morality, but as a pragmatic economic policy. In the Cold War, Western Europe stood united against threats from the East. In 2024, balloons and drones from Belarus paralyze a NATO member's capital airport, while European defense ministers struggle to formulate a response. During the feminist movements of recent decades, political leaders learned to at least publicly support women's rights. In 2024, a president's wife gets caught on camera dismissing feminist protesters with crude insults. After World War II, European integration became the defining project of the continent. In 2024, eurosceptic coalitions control governments in multiple member states, and for 70 years, the transatlantic alliance anchored Western security. In 2024, the American president calls that alliance weak and decaying. If you're a subscriber, drop a comment below telling me which of these 5 crises you think is the most significant, because I genuinely want to know what you're seeing from your perspective. And if this kind of analysis is valuable to you, if you appreciate someone connecting these dots instead of just reporting them as isolated incidents, hit that like button and consider supporting this channel. Independent journalism doesn't fund itself, and the reason I can tell you these uncomfortable truths is because I don't answer to corporate sponsors or political parties. I answer to you. The question Europe faces isn't whether these changes are happening. They're obviously happening right in front of us. The question is whether this represents a temporary populist surge that will eventually correct itself, or whether we're witnessing a fundamental realignment of European politics that will define the continent for generations. And here's why I think it's the latter. Every single one of these incidents reveals a European system that's reactive rather than proactive, defensive rather than confident, fragmented rather than unified. When your response to smuggling balloons is to declare a state of emergency and close airports, you're not demonstrating strength. When your response to far-right proposals is to debate them on their merits rather than address the underlying anxieties driving voters toward populism, you're not preventing the problem. When your First Lady has to issue clarifications about insulting feminists, you're not projecting moral authority. When a Czech billionaire can form a eurosceptic government with far-right partners and Brussels can only express concern, you're not exercising meaningful oversight. And when the American president openly mocks your weakness and you have no effective response, you're not maintaining a credible alliance. Tanguy's brothel proposal will probably generate weeks of debate in French media, endless opinion pieces about morality and pragmatism and women's rights and economic policy. But none of that debate will address why the national rally is now strong enough to put this on the agenda in the first place. Lithuanian officials will investigate the balloon incidents, probably increase border surveillance, maybe deploy additional resources to monitor airspace, but none of those measures will answer why Belarus feels emboldened to allow this kind of harassment of a NATO member. Brigitte Macron might eventually issue some form of apology. Her team will probably craft a statement about respecting all voices in democratic discourse. But that won't repair the damage to her husband's image as a progressive leader, and it won't heal the rift between institutional politics and grassroots activism. Babiš will govern the Czech Republic with his eurosceptic coalition, pushing back against Brussels on immigration, on Ukraine support, on climate policy, and the EU will negotiate, compromise, try to find common ground. But that won't stop other member states from following the Czech example. And Trump will continue saying whatever he wants about Europe, will continue supporting populist candidates who align with his worldview, and European leaders will issue dignified responses, will reaffirm their commitment to shared values. But that won't change the power dynamic that now exists across the Atlantic. So here's the most interesting part, the thing I promised you at the beginning that ties everything together. All 5 of these stories share one common element that nobody's talking about. They're all examples of established order, traditional norms, conventional wisdom being openly challenged by actors who have decided that the post-war European consensus no longer serves their interests. The 1946 decision to close brothels represented a certain vision of French society. Tanguy wants to overturn it. The sanctity of national airspace represented a basic principle of sovereignty. Belarusian operators are violating it with impunity. The expectation that political figures will respect social justice movements represented a norm of democratic discourse. Brigitte Macron broke it. The assumption that Czech politics would remain oriented toward deeper European integration represented Brussels' understanding of Central European trajectory. Babiš just shattered it, and the belief that America would always support European unity represented the foundation of transatlantic relations. Trump demolished it. What we're witnessing isn't 5 separate crises. We're witnessing 5 fronts in the same war. A war over whether the institutions, norms, and values that have governed Europe since 1945 will survive into the second half of the 21st century. And right now, if I'm being completely honest with you, the forces of disruption are winning, not because they have better ideas, but because they're willing to act, while the defenders of the status quo are still trying to figure out how to respond without appearing defensive or desperate or out of touch. The traditional center in European politics, the coalition of center-left and center-right parties that have alternated power for decades, they're paralyzed by their own respectability. They can't match the rhetorical aggression of the populists without abandoning their brand as responsible moderates. They can't address the underlying anxieties driving voters rightward without validating the populist critique of their own past policies. And they can't take dramatic action to secure borders, reshape migration policy, or confront hybrid threats without looking like they're copying from the nationalist playbook. Meanwhile, the nationalists and populists have no such constraints. Marine Le Pen can support reopening brothels one day and condemn moral decay the next. Babiš can promise to defend Czech sovereignty while forming alliances with leaders in Budapest and Bratislava who are doing the exact same thing. Trump can call Europe weak while European leaders stand there and take it, because what's their alternative? Get into a public fight with the American president and prove his point about European disunity? The asymmetry in this conflict is stunning. One side is bound by conventions, norms, and a desire to appear serious and statesmanlike. The other side recognizes those constraints as weaknesses to exploit. One side believes in slow, deliberate, consensus-driven responses to challenges. The other side moves fast, breaks things, and apologizes never. Before we close, let me remind you what we've covered here. We started with Jean-Philippe Tanguy's proposal to reopen French brothels, an initiative backed by Marine Le Pen that would overturn a 79-year-old law and reignite debates about morality, pragmatism, and women's rights. We examined Lithuania's unprecedented crisis with hundreds of balloons from Belarus carrying contraband, shutting down airports, and exposing European vulnerability to hybrid warfare. We analyzed Brigitte Macron's caught-on-camera insults toward feminists, revealing the gap between political elite rhetoric and their actual attitudes toward social movements. We explored Andrej Babiš's return to power in the Czech Republic, forming a eurosceptic coalition that strengthens the nationalist bloc within the European Union. And we confronted Donald Trump's brutal assessment of European leadership, his open declaration that he views America's traditional allies as weak, politically correct, and lost. These aren't random events. They're connected symptoms of a European order in crisis, a system being challenged simultaneously from within and without by populists demanding national sovereignty, by hybrid threats exploiting technological and regulatory gaps, by social movements clashing with political elites, and by an American president who sees more value in disrupting the transatlantic alliance than preserving it. The question isn't whether Europe will change. That's already happening. The question is whether Europe will recognize itself after these changes reshape its political landscape, its security architecture, its social fabric, and its relationship with the rest of the world. And honestly, based on what we're seeing right now, I'm not sure anyone in Brussels has a good answer to that question. If you found this analysis valuable, if this helped you understand what's really happening beneath the headline noise, do 3 things for me. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and seriously consider becoming a sponsor. This is the work that matters, connecting the dots that others either can't see or won't talk about, and your support makes it possible. Drop a comment telling me what you think, where you think Europe is heading, whether you see any path back to unity and strength. I read every comment, and your insights make this community smarter. Until next time, keep watching, keep questioning, and keep demanding the truth.